The UK is moving further away from China and closer to the US. A series of recent anti-Beijing measures have brought London a lot of praise from its transatlantic ally.
We want to see every nation who understands freedom and democracy and values that and knows that it's important to their own people, their own sovereign country, to be successful, to understand this threat that the Chinese Communist Party is posing to them, and to work both themselves and collectively to restore what is rightfully ours. I want to take this opportunity to congratulate the British government for its principled responses to these challenges.
A day before US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's visit to London, the UK suspended an extradition treaty and extended a China arms embargo to Hong Kong. That's in response to a national security law Beijing imposed on the city. It also prompted British Prime Minister Boris Johnson to invite millions of Hong Kongers to apply for British citizenship. And that's angered China.
China urges the United Kingdom to abandon the illusion of continuing its colonial influence in Hong Kong and to stop interfering in Hong Kong affairs. China will give a strong response to the erroneous actions of the United Kingdom.
Adding to those tensions has been the UK's decision to block telecoms giant Huawei from its 5G networks. It's a reversal for the government and a victory for the US, which believes the company is a security risk.
We have an end state for the people of the United States, which is to make sure that the data sets, the private data that belongs to Americans, doesn't end up in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party.
China, which has stakes in major UK rail and nuclear projects, has warned the ban will hurt investment. It's accused London of being Washington's puppet. The US recently also declared Beijing's claims over the South China Sea illegal. For its part, China slapped sanctions on Lockheed Martin, which has boosted sales to Beijing's rivals in the region. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic's impact on supply chains, the defense contractor reported strong second quarter results and expects net sales to hit $65 billion this year. As the US and UK seem to be taking joint action against Beijing, some analysts fear taking on China may come at a cost, as the UK is facing its worst recession in 3 centuries. Sibel Karkus, TRT World.
For more on this story, let's go to Martin Jacques in London. He's the author of the book When China Rules the World and is a visiting professor at Tsinghua University in Beijing. Welcome back to the program, Martin. Now, Mike Pompeo's visit to the UK comes at a time when the UK appears to be aligning with the Trump administration's increasingly combative stance against China. Is this a result of the Trump administration really intensely lobbying the UK government to fall in line?
Yeah, I think that there's no question at all that the Trump administration has put very heavy pressure on the British government. The British government is vulnerable, partly because, of course, Johnson, in a sense, belongs to the same kind of ideological tendency, populist tendency that the Trump administration does. And, of course, perhaps even more important, is that the UK is now very vulnerable because it's left the EU and it's not clear where it's going to go, and that's even more clear now with what it's doing in relationship to China. I think that the UK is in a really serious situation, actually.
Yes, now, as we heard in the story there, last week the UK decided to ban Huawei from its 5G networks, when in January, just a few months ago, Boris Johnson actually gave UK mobile companies the green light to use Huawei equipment. What's changed between then and now?
I think American pressure, I guess. I mean, partly it is this sort of tub-thumping build-up of a Cold War, which is really the doing of the Trump administration. I mean, that's where it all comes from. Not a great deal has changed, in my opinion, with regard to China's position, but clearly the American position has changed markedly, and it's stepped up the pressure on the UK, and I would imagine behind the scenes, it's threatened the UK with regard to the UK-US forthcoming trade deal, whatever that happens to be, and the UK, in response, has crumbled. I mean, never underestimate the fact that although it's described as the sort of the special relationship, the junior partner of the United States, actually the UK, essentially since 1945, has been a vassal state of the United States, with, as a result, limited sovereignty in key respects.
Now, one of the circuit breakers that has emerged appears to be Beijing's controversial national security law for Hong Kong. We've seen countries like Australia and Canada withdraw their extradition treaties with Hong Kong. The UK has just done the same. I mean, those are legitimate concerns, aren't they? The fact that Beijing is really eroding Hong Kong's autonomy, which it had promised during the handover.
Well, this has been a criticism, not just now, but a criticism over a long period since not the handover in 1997. And I don't think, to be quite frank about it, until now, there's been much evidence of it. I mean, Hong Kong has remained, until now, very different. The problem from mainland China, the problem was especially what happened last year with the rioting and the violence and so on. Now, no modern government would tolerate that kind of violence going on and on. The problem, one of the problems the Chinese had, or rather the Hong Kong government had, was it had no national security legislation. There was provision for it in the basic law, but it was never successfully introduced. And so they were very vulnerable. I think it was absolutely inevitable that they would introduce some legislation like that. And right, I mean, which country would, go about its daily life without any kind of legislation of this kind? Now, you can argue about whether it goes too far. That seems to me a fair argument. But the idea that they somehow shouldn't have this, I think, is utter hypocrisy.
Okay, Martin Jacques in London, thank you again for joining us on the programme.